This is my video on David Price versus Erkan Teper. I might go on for a little bit in this one. There's a few different angles I want to explore, a few different discussion points that I want to look at apart from the obvious. So we're going to talk about both fighters involved. We're going to talk about where they go from here. We're going to use Price as a comparator for various different fighters in the heavyweight division, namely the likes of Anthony Joshua, Dillian Whyte, Tyson Fury. You know, we're going to try and draw some analogies between the two camps, and obviously we're going to talk about the fight itself. So I think that's the sensible place to begin with. Let's talk about what happened last night. If you've been hiding under a rock, David Price lost by second round knockout to Turkish-based German Erkan Teper in a heavyweight fight in Germany. I've watched the fight. First and foremost, thanks to Teper, who tweeted me with the news of what had happened. I was actually away with Mrs. Gossip last night, so I wasn't watching the fight live. I was simply, was able to catch up on it, and I've obviously watched the fight in its duration now. If you haven't, it will only take you 4 or 5 minutes, so I'd recommend it. Let's start with David Price. This was a terrible, terrible performance from David Price. He looked thoroughly like the second best man in there. Although the fight was only over 4 or 5 rounds, 4 or 5 minutes, I acknowledge that there is time for the fight to turn around, and it was very, very early stages in the fight when the fight got called off and Price got knocked out. But for my money, Erkan Teper won the first round, and Erkan Teper was comfortably winning the second round. He looked like he had the beating of Price over that 4 or 5 minute period. I think what was amazing to me, and this was the real profound thing, is you've got Price, who's this Olympian with the sort of great physique. He's the big man, he's lean, he's well muscled. Whereas you've got Erkan Teper, who, in my mind, is a glorified bouncer, I must admit. Erkan Teper, he's an overweight guy, he's a slugger, he's not athletic, he's not technical. But the first thing that surprised me is the speed difference in this fight. I was amazed how slow David Price was. Erkan Teper, when he came forward, looked to be the more explosive, dynamic, and faster guy out of the two. And my hats go off to Erkan Teper. He impressed me in this fight, and I got this one completely wrong. If you watch my pre-fight video, you'll know that I thought David Price was not only the superior technician, but the superior puncher, and I expected Price to win. So acknowledge that I got that one hopelessly wrong, and credit to Erkan Teper. He performed better than I expected him to. As I say, Teper looked like the faster, more aggressive fighter. His jab, the crazy thing is, we'll get to Price's jab in a minute, but Erkan Teper's jab was by far the more effective of the two jabs in the ring. And he was kind of using his jab not really as a sort of battering ram, more as a way of kind of holding Price up and stopping Price from throwing back so Teper could get inside. Because, of course, Price is the much bigger man with the bigger range. And Teper's jab was landing. Landing on several occasions. He caught David Price clean with a jab. He appeared, Teper is what I describe as a plodder. But in terms of his footwork, whilst very, very basic, he was able to get inside of David Price. And David Price was so robotic, so upright, so undynamic, he was unable to sort of circle away. He was unable to maintain distance. He was unable to take a step back. And it essentially became a fight where Erkan Teper was the come forward guy, but David Price was unable to fight on the back foot. He was unable to wheel away. He was not able to clinch like Vladimir Klitschko. He couldn't clinch and stop Erkan Teper from working on the inside effectively. Price's defence was very, very leaky, and Teper was able to jab his way in, get inside Price's jab, and land combinations of hooks. He caught David Price, although it was a second round knockout, he caught David Price 3 or 4 times with hooks in the first round. And he looked like he could hurt David Price. Price looked nervous, very static, a real lack of movement and athleticism from what I could see. All in all, it was a very, very disappointing performance from David Price, who showed that he has got no inside game, no ability to clinch, no defence, and no back foot game. And really just a sort of complete lack of athletic movement. Erkan Teper looked by far the better of the two. And in the second round, again, with Price unable to clinch and close Teper down, with Teper on the front foot making Price go backwards, the defence was open, Teper threw a 2-hook combination, and I think it was a left-handed hook that caught Price and knocked him out cold, and it was a heavy knockout. It was a bad, bad knockout. This is like Povetkin versus Perez, you know. It was a heavy, heavy knockout. Price was down for the count of 10. To be honest, he'd have probably been down for the count of 100 if we'd been counting. Initial concerns about David Price, would he be alright? Looks like he got up, looks like he recovered. My eye looks like there's no lasting damage done, and I haven't heard anything negative since, but it was a horrible knockout. Very, very, very bad knockout. We knew Erkan Teper carried power. We knew that he'd broken Martin Rogan's jaw. We knew that he'd knocked out Michael Sprott in one round. We knew he could punch. But what surprised me was not the fact that he could punch, it was the ease with which he landed. Okay? Because it's very easy to look like a big puncher when you're facing a lower level of competition or a journeyman level of opposition. Very easy to look like you can punch. Because these lesser fighters have no movement and no defence. What surprised me is against David Price, a guy who's got a winning record, a guy who's highly touted, Teper was still able to land with ease. Teper was still able to sort of get his way inside and throw power punches without the sort of elaborate technique and elaborate athleticism movement that is associated with the top of the heavyweight division. And Teper, he clearly carries power. He clearly carries power. David Price, I mean, for me, what I'm thinking of after last night, very predictable. Very, very predictable. He fights in a not dissimilar manner to Vladimir Klitschko, but with even less tools. He doesn't have the great lead left of Vladimir Klitschko. He doesn't have the battering ram jab of Vladimir Klitschko. He doesn't have the ability to clinch like Vladimir Klitschko. He's solely reliant on that long right hand. Without the effective jab against an opponent with any ambition, he finds it hard to open up the opponent and get the gaps to land that straight right. His jab was appalling in this fight. We've talked about his jab time and time again, but it's this sort of pouring, robotic thing as opposed to an actual strong jab that's going to snap an opponent's head back. And against a guy like Erkan Teper, it was completely useless. Teper was able to get inside the guard. He was able to block Price's straight right just by keeping his hands high, just doing the basics, and he sort of completely cut Price down. What was Price lacking? Jab, movement, back foot game, defence. It was a very basic performance from David Price. What this fight reminded me of was actually Lucas Brown versus Richard Towers. At the time, Richard Towers was this tall, athletic, strong heavyweight who was unbeaten, who had a very high knockout ratio. And, he'd been ending people with the straight 1-2. But he stepped up in levels, fought Lucas Brown, and, got horribly knocked out. And the thing is what people forget is David Price, he's been on the scene for a while now. He's been talked about as a highly rated heavyweight for a while now. But I just pulled up BoxRec and I tried to work out who is the best opponent that David Price has ever beaten. It's probably Audley Harrison. And that says a lot. There's a few names there or thereabouts. Andre Parla, Sam Sexton, that level of guy. But if you look at David Price's opponents head-to-head, the best one he's been in with is unbeaten, is probably Audley Harrison. Obviously, Tony Thompson's the best one he's been in with, but Tony Thompson beat him twice as well. Now, Erkan Teper is a heavyweight at a certain level, but he's performing with credit, and you'd have to say that Teper was actually a step up from Price's last fight against Costa Jr. And if you want to find my video on that, which has obviously remained on YouTube, you can see that I criticise Price for the same things, for being very static, very robotic, lacking any sort of variation to his game, and I think that really is key. This reminded me, as I say, about Lucas Brown and Towers. You know, Lucas Brown, another guy like Teper, who I view as a glorified bouncer, a guy who comes forward, not overly technical, big, strong, powerful, can hurt you if you're there to be hit. And to be honest, the way David Price performed in this fight, it reminded me of Richard Towers. You know, it was at that sort of level. Now, what I would say is, you know, previously there'd been debates over David Price's chin. Yeah, the first knockout loss to Tony Thompson was definitely a knockout, but it was a weird punch, wasn't it? It was behind the ear. Was it some equilibrium problem? The second knockout to Tony Thompson wasn't actually a knockout. It was Price exhausted and stopped on his feet. But this was a heavy knockout. This was his chin tested. This was his chin hit hard. And as I say, it resulted in a very, very heavy knockout. So I'll bring part one of this video to a close, talking about, you know, the fight itself. Teper fought in a manner similar to like a Derek Chisora style fighter, a cross between like a Derek Chisora and a Lucas Brown, but probably more the Derek Chisora side, because you're not a fan of straight punches, quite obvious in the come forward fashion, looking to avoid the jab and get inside and throw combinations of hooks. He used to be a harder puncher than Derek Chisora, but he used similar tactics to how a Derek Chisora would typically operate against a taller opponent like David Price. And even though I call this fight horrifically wrong, long-time followers will know that I've said Derek Chisora would represent a very difficult challenge for David Price because of the style. Because if you could get inside on Price, you could drown him. And this is the first time we've really seen in a pro fight just how limited Price's back foot and inside game is, and we've seen how much he struggles. Because all the opponents he's been in with before haven't really tested him in that fashion. Even Tony Thompson, you know, who beat him badly. Tony Thompson is a tall southpaw, a sort of veteran of the game, you know, a jabber. So Tony Thompson exposed him, but not in this way. So that was really evident, and it became clear that Price's poor, lacklustre jab didn't have the power and snap behind it to keep an ambitious, come-forward, strong fighter like Teper on the outside. And Price didn't have the strings to his bow, the movement, the defence to keep himself in the fight. That's my sort of brief breakdown, if you like, of what exactly went on in the ring. Let's talk where that leaves both guys. Now, BoxRec have Erkan Teper at number 9 right now. And let me say, I think that's extremely generous. Erkan Teper, he's beaten Johan de Hapaz in a lacklustre points fight. He's knocked out Martin Rogan, Michael Sprott, he's knocked out David Price. David Price is his biggest win to date. Where do I rate David Price? I did a video some time back about my top 20 heavyweights. You'll have noticed David Price wasn't in that list. Put simply, it comes down to the guys that David Price has or hasn't beaten. You know, and as I say, the best opponent he's gone in with and beaten is probably Audley Harrison. So I had David Price sort of probably between 25 and 30 in my heavyweight rankings. And Teper's beat him with something in hand. So I'd probably have Teper as fringe top 20. I doubt I have him top 15. In fact, pretty confident I wouldn't have him top 15. In terms of the level of opposition, a win over David Price does represent stronger form than anything we've seen from Lucas Brown. It represents stronger form than anything we've seen from Hughie Fury, Anthony Joshua, Joseph Parker, Dillian Whyte. You know, I'm not hating on those guys. It's just the fact that none of those individuals have beaten a fighter as highly rated and as good, in my opinion, as David Price. And I don't think David Price is that great, but he's a guy at a certain level. So I have Erkan Teper bottom end of the top 20, probably something like 18, 19, 20 if I sat down and worked it out. He can clearly bang, he's got power, he's got ambition, he's not afraid to mix it up with guys like David Price, but fundamentally I don't see Erkan Teper having much upside. I don't see him going much further, despite how good he looked last night. And he did impress me last night. Erkan Teper is a better fighter than I thought he was going to be. I got him wrong, so admit that. And if you were on my video previously commenting that you thought Teper would win, credit to you, fair play to you. You were right, I was wrong. Nevertheless, I like to think that the reason I was wrong was not about how good Erkan Teper was. It's actually about how bad David Price was last night. And for me, Erkan Teper isn't going to go much further than top 20, top 15. He's going to struggle to get beyond that because the technique is limited. He's very one-dimensional. He is a plodder. And the way, when I've seen him fight before and it's gone rounds, if you can weather the early storm and live with his power for the first couple of rounds, it may be easy to outpoint him late in fights. Guys who can move, guys who can defend, guys who can fight for 12 rounds beat Erkan Teper. In my mind, a guy like Eddie Chambers beats Erkan Teper. I said that Teper's higher rated than this guy based on form alone, but stylistically I think Hughie Fury beats Erkan Teper. All I think is that those kind of guys, the Hughie Furies, the Eddie Chambers, the technicians, the guys who are movers, the guy who've got different strings to their bow and aren't going to be as static and available to hit as David Price, can cause this guy problems. Because I think looking at the shape of him and looking at his fight against Johan de Happers, if you can take this guy past 5 or 6 rounds, you may be able to just jab him from range and move around him, you know, and outbox him and run circles around him. And I think, unfortunately, that's where David Price came up short. So, Erkan Teper, he's top 20, yes. Is he very good? No. Does he have huge upside beyond where he currently is? Probably not. No, probably not. I view him, and this is a very harsh thing to say, but there's several fighters in the heavyweight division who I view as educated bouncers. You know, I've already mentioned one name, Lucas Brown. There are a few other names I could throw in. Alex Leopai, for example. I view Erkan Teper in that bracket. He may be very good for that bracket. He may even be the best educated bouncer out there right now. You know, Christian Hamer types. But fundamentally, he's not got the technique, he's not got the athleticism, he's not got the skills to go beyond this, I don't think. He does carry power, he's got a puncher's chance in any fight he's been in, but those punches that he's landing, you're just not going to land on the elite of the sport. Yeah, as I say, guys like Hughie Fury, Eddie Chambers, Malik Scott, you're not going to be landing those punches on guys. They'll be able to tie you up, they'll be able to move away from you, they'll be stronger defensively. They'll throw a moving jab on their back foot. They won't get found out the same way. So I think Erkan Teper, credit to him, but where he goes from here, I don't necessarily see it. Now, let's talk David Price. I think David Price is in a very difficult position. Very difficult position. Very much he falls into the Who Needs Him club now. Now it depends. If Sauerland support him, if they decide to rebuild him again for another time, and they throw him 4 or 5 comeback fights, and then throw some big money at an opponent, could he launch the comeback again? He could, yes. If Sauerland decide to part their investment with David Price, it becomes much, much, much more difficult for him. Because he's very much in this Who Need Him club. Because, as I say, the best opponent David Price has beaten is Audley Harrison. He's just been horrifically knocked out by Erkan Teper. If you put your prospect in with him, say Eddie Hearn put Anthony Joshua in with him, you wouldn't actually stand to win a lot by beating David Price. In the public's eyes, he's a guy who's been knocked out 3 times. He's been stopped by Erkan Teper, who's a guy that the public won't have heard of. And he hasn't really beaten anyone even approaching world level. My point being, beating David Price doesn't actually add that much credibility and move you up the ranks. You know, you don't become a top 10 heavyweight just by beating David Price. So the reward for beating him is limited. And the difficulty is, despite the fact that Price can obviously be beaten, he's still a risky guy to fight. Because however much criticism you stick on David Price, the guy can hit. And the guy can hit really, really, really hard. And if we now say David Price is a top 40 heavyweight, at that sort of level, you know, between 30 and 40 in terms of the rankings, He's probably the hardest puncher out there. Yeah, for me, he hits a lot harder than the likes of Manuel Char, Malik Scott, Alex Leopai, Andre Rudenko. You know, he's at that sort of level. But all of these guys are safer bets because they don't hit anywhere near as hard as David Price. They're probably not as tall and as big as David Price. So I worry that he falls now into a who needs him club. You know, too risky to stick your prospect in with him. He could knock them out. Yet you don't really get much reward for beating him. So I think that's a really, really difficult position that David Price is in. Now, what I would say is David Price is a classic example of a hype job gone wrong. You know, he's not a bad fighter, Price. But whilst I say he's not a bad fighter, at this stage I have to concede that he's also not a good fighter. Not good, certainly in the stakes that he's being talked about. You know, let's remember the hysteria about this guy when he was on the way up. Let's remember all the casual fans who thought he was going to be the greatest heavyweight of all time. Who thought he was going to beat Klitschko. Let's remember what a massive favourite he was over Tyson Fury. And I always fancied Fury in that fight. But let's remember what an overwhelming favourite he was to beat Tyson Fury. You know, who fancies him to beat Fury right now? You know, my point is, David Price has got to this stage of his career, even with the Tony Thompson losses, and he's never been tested on the inside before. His back foot game has never been tested before. His ability to clinch has never been tested before. His ability to take a clean shot on the chin, like he did last night, had not really been tested before. You know, his ability to deal with an opponent who's trying to get inside on him hadn't really been tested before. Now, all of those tests came at once in the form of Erkan Teper, and he failed on every front. This is despite how devastating he looked against the journeyman and against the lower order opponents he faced. My point is this: when you face lower opponents and journeymen, you don't get tested in certain ways. All of those things I talked about, the movement, the defence, the inside game, the back foot, you don't get tested in those ways. So if you can punch very hard and get people out of there, you look very, very, very good. A guy like David Price attracted much more hype than a guy like Hughie Fury, because against those lower order opponents they faced on their way up, David Price was knocking people out horribly, Hughie Fury wasn't. So it was that power element that made Price such a star on the way up. And it's that power element that's made Anthony Joshua such a star on the way up. Yeah, Anthony Joshua has never, just like Price hadn't, Anthony Joshua has not faced those tests and those challenges in the ring. Similar to David Price, it is unclear whether Joshua can clinch. It's unclear whether he can fight on the inside. It's unclear if he's got any back foot game. Now, my review of his amateur background tells me he may well not have any of those assets. You know, he looked very uncomfortable in the amateurs when people threw back at him, when people came forward, when people didn't get bullied by him. He looked very uncomfortable. And he's yet to face an opponent like Erkan Teper, who's going to bring that. You know, Joshua's jab does look better than David Price's. One thing I will say in Joshua's favour, I think that he's passed that test, and we know he's got that ramrod jab. But how will he cope with a guy who asks the questions like Erkan Teper did last night? The honest answer is anyone here can speculate, but we don't actually know. It's an intangible. It is an intangible. And there are a lot of similarities between Price and Joshua. Similar physique, massive guys, massive punchers. Not got much experience on the way up because they were riding through everyone. You know, there's a lot of similarities there. Question marks over their chins, question marks over their stamina, question marks over their defence, question marks over the back foot game. What I'm saying is it's too early to be lauding Anthony Joshua as the saviour of the heavyweight division. Look at what happened to David Price. Look at how David Price looked on the way up. Look at how people were talking about David Price. Let me say this, if I was Dillian Whyte, I would be looking at that Erkan Teper fight and I'd be trying to test Anthony Joshua in exactly the same ways that Erkan Teper tested David Price. You know, the truth is we had no idea about Joshua's capability in any of those areas. So if you're Dillian Whyte, take Joshua out of his comfort zone, then don't let him stand at that favoured range, and ask the same questions that Erkan Teper did. How will Joshua respond? We don't know, it's an intangible. What we do know is we know that he'll win if Whyte just steps off him. Finally, let me say this. Tyson Fury's a guy who gets a lot of stick. People think that Anthony Joshua looks like a far more devastating prospect than Tyson Fury. But let me say this. As I've already mentioned, Erkan Teper, Derek Chisora, they're not the same fighter. There's a lot of differences there, but there are many similarities between them. Now we know from experience that Tyson Fury can fight on the back foot. We know that he can keep a guy like Derek Chisora, an in-shape Derek Chisora on a massive winning streak. We know he can keep that Chisora outside the entire time. We also know that Tyson Fury has an extremely advanced inside game. He is so much more well-rounded than David Price. Yet he didn't initially get the praise because he lacked the power. His well-roundedness is proven far beyond Anthony Joshua. Far beyond it. Now, let me say this. If Tyson Fury fought Erkan Teper now, we kind of know Fury wins that fight. He's already won very similar fights against Derek Chisora, against Christian Hamer. We know that his jab would cause a problem for Teper. And we know that even if Teper did get inside, Fury has some defensive technique. Fury could tie him up. Fury is tough on the inside. We know that Fury is very, very light on his feet and a good mover, especially going backwards for a big guy. We kind of know that Fury beats Erkan Teper. We've seen him do it before with similar fighters. But do we know that Anthony Joshua beats Erkan Teper? Joshua is a bigger puncher than Fury. Joshua may wipe Teper out in 10 seconds. But if he didn't, if Teper asked the same questions, we certainly don't know that Joshua comes through it. And it's those kind of fights that will really test the mettle of Anthony Joshua. Firstly, to see if he's as well-rounded as a guy like Tyson Fury. Secondly, to see if he's got capability to go on to be the heavyweight champ. Dillian Whyte, he can ask some of those questions. Erkan Teper's performance last night was far and above the best we've seen of Dillian Whyte. But Dillian Whyte's got similar attributes. He can ask some questions. And if he uses that as a blueprint, he's given himself a fighting chance. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know your thoughts on this fight. How did you think it went? Where does David Price go from here? Where does Teper go from here? You know, I see Teper as European level without upside above that. Do you agree with me that Dillian Whyte can adopt a similar game plan to Erkan Teper when he fights Anthony Joshua? Do you agree with me that Tyson Fury schools Erkan Teper? Eddie Chambers beats Erkan Teper. Malik Scott beats Erkan Teper. And where does David Price go from here? Am I right that he's in the Who Needs Him club? Will Sauerland stay with him? Where does he go from here? Is it game over? Will he rebuild again? Thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed this, please do give me the thumbs up. Please click subscribe so you don't miss any of my future stuff. Thanks very much for watching.